Matthew Warner asked, what RPG that everyone hates is one that you actually enjoy? That's the funny thing about this, is that the more I talk about the games that I used to really like that a lot of other people didn't, the more I find out that the people who I grew up with just didn't like RPGs. the the one that I thought nobody liked, honestly, the one that I thought that I really enjoyed that I didn't ever hear anybody talking about before was Mystical Ninja starring Goemon for Nintendo 64. But obviously now, with the advent of the internet, there's a ton of people who actually really like that game. The only one that I think that I still actually have a soft spot for, that a lot of people really don't care for, the one that comes to mind at this point is Brain Lord. That was that action RPG by Produce. It's kind of like a Zelda clone, but with a lot of puzzle solving, problem solving, some platforming, and some really unfair things overall. Definitely check it out if you are at all interested, but it is one that it's super unique on the Super Nintendo, but a lot of people really don't like it. And I think that in my review, I even said it was probably something like Stockholm Syndrome, where I was stuck with this game for so long that it began to grow on me. I did in fact liken it to a cancer in that regard, but it's one of those games that I hate to love it. Matthew Warner also asked, what RPG do you struggle playing? Meaning either you don't finish it because it's so boring, or you just don't want to play it. The one RPG that I've played so far that I did just buckle down and power my way through it, that I really did not want to, and I was super frustrated with it in many ways, was Persona 3 The Answer, which is included in Persona 3 FES. Persona 3 The Answer, without spoiling anything for you guys, is essentially kind of like a remixed extra chapter for Persona 3 that takes place after the events of Persona 3. And The Answer does a lot of things with the video game mechanics. It has this way of just cranking up the difficulty by pitting you against enemies that have like a weakness that you have to exploit, right, in order to attack them and deal real damage. But then they'll also oftentimes have like a dodge mechanic for that specific weakness. So like enemies would have like, oh, they're super weak to fire, but they also have dodge fire enabled. So it's just like a roll of the dice as to whether or not you'll ever hit any of them. And then they're also matched up with other enemies. So like you'll have two people who are weak to fire and absorb ice, but then you'll have like one enemy that's like weak to ice but absorbs fire and stuff. And it's just like that the entire way through the game. It's super frustrating. And then on top of all of that, it just undoes all of the character development that occurred throughout the course of Persona 3's main storyline. So, after the end of Persona 3, you're like, oh, all these people are so much better for all these interactions that I have with them. And then, in Persona 3, The Answer, it's just like, these people are all broken again. And what was even the point? It's so frustrating. So that's the one that I really struggled with. I even said in my review of that if it wasn't for you guys as my motivation, I could not have made it through that game because I was just so frustrated. I'm not usually one who gets very frustrated to the point of like wanting to throw a controller or even like tears in my eyes. Like nothing usually will get me to that point. I've been streaming on YouTube or on Twitch for a good long while now, and if you guys have checked that out, you'll see I do get frustrated sometimes, but not quite to that point. And I definitely rage quit on that more than once on the same boss. So, but there's another game that I remember from my childhood that I am really both looking forward to talking about and not talking about, and not looking forward to it rather. the one that I'm most not looking forward to playing is also on the Super Nintendo, and this one is Lord of the Rings Volume 1 for Super Nintendo. This is another one of those games that I played when I was much younger, you know, finding a lot of the stuff that I needed to play via renting games from the local Dillon's grocery store. Lord of the Rings on Super Nintendo was an action RPG where you play as Frodo and all of the hobbits, and I never got very far. I'm not even sure if it's a game that can be beaten because it's so absolutely broken. It is so badly broken, but at the same time I really want to show how badly broken it actually is. I know JonTron did talk about it in a video, but the thing is about JonTron and PBG and people like that, I find that, I mean, and this is not like a disrespect in any way, but what their videos typically are comedic relief, like the Angry Video Game Nerd. They are comedy shows featuring bad games, generally speaking, but they're not actually reviews in the classic sense. I would like to give this a proper review, and this might be the only game that I actually forego that stipulation that I imposed upon myself of having must complete the game, because I really don't know if you can actually do that. I mean, maybe you can, I don't know. I have to look it up, see if anybody's actually been able to. I'm sure somebody has. So this other question here came from a guy called Cilantro. Cilantro, get it? It's a pun. Are there any final bosses you just couldn't beat? Yeah, of course. There were two games that I remember that I just could not defeat the final bosses on. First game that I experienced a boss that I just could not finish was my first playthrough of Earthbound. I finally made it to the end of the game on my own. This was back before guides, you know? Or at least back before I knew about going online and just looking up a guide. Because this was my first RPG. You know, my first turn-based RPG. And I make my way through the entire game, and I get to Gygus. Now there's probably a minor spoiler here for the fight against Gygus. If anybody here has not already finished the game, you might mute this for... I'll wave my hand like this when I'm done. When I'm done saying spoilery stuff about Earthbound, so just mute it for a moment. But so the thing about Earthbound and Gygus is that you cannot defeat Gygus unless you use this useless move called Pray. And up until this point, this move basically does nothing. It either does like a little bit of healing, or it like gives your team a whole bunch of status effects. So it's one of those things where you have to use this special thing that you've seen, and I got all the way to the end of the game, and oh yeah, spoiler is over, so I'll do this again. So there's no more spoilers. So I get to the end of the game, and I just was fighting Gygus over and over and over and over again until I eventually got everybody up to level 99. I actually got all of my characters up to level 99. All 4 characters, 99 max stats. Still couldn't beat it, so I put the game down for like 3 months. Eventually I went back, and then I picked out what the hint was to actually finish it. So, yeah, as if it wasn't already spoiled years ago. It's, you know, it's one of those things that I can't expect everybody to have played it, but at this point, it is probably a reasonable expectation. But anyways, so eventually I did figure out how to defeat Gygus, and that brought me to tears, man. Like, not just the frustration of being stuck on this boss for 3 months straight, but also what that event does. It convinced me, it solidified right there that RPGs were something really special, and they have the power to be more than just a video game. They can be just as much a work of literacy, or of a literary work, as like a book, or as emotionally involving as a movie, or even more so, because you spend so much time with them. You know, it just solidified that for me. So that was the first one. The other game that I got stuck on forever was Breath of Fire 3. I always loved playing through Breath of Fire 3, but the final boss of that game just came out of nowhere and just destroyed me, and I did eventually end up putting that down for a long while, and I only just finally beat it when it came time to review Breath of Fire 3 again, or review it for the first time when I was going through my backlog for the game collection. That was the other game that less interesting was of a story, but that was one that I was super frustrated with and stuck on for a good long while. Ever played a terrible RPG? So I've heard Beyond the Beyond is awful. That's just what I've heard, but I haven't played it. I've heard that Ephemeral Fantasia is also really bad. I've heard some. I hear these things from a lot of people, but the one that I think I still dislike the most, even after finishing the game, is probably Lufia 1. And by that I don't mean the Lufia 1 that everybody else got in Europe. I'm talking about Lufia and the Fortress of Doom, which was a game. It was basically Fetch Quest the game, and the game featured nested fetch quests, and it was just bad. That was probably one of the worst. Yeah, the encounter rate was really rough, and those fetch quests, man, the aluminium fetch quests. Oh, I mean, I get it that most RPG quests are essentially go here, get thing, bring back, you know, fetch quests. But usually they do a better job of like disguising them as something meaningful. It's just like, go collect 7 pieces of aluminium. and then, God, it was just a pain. Quest 64 was also pretty bad, except it had a lot of promise, and I think that was what was most frustrating about it. I feel like Quest 64 could have been better if they had just put more time and money into it.